Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the very second Technical Tuesday. So, today I wanted to cover moving averages. A few of you guys have asked me, what settings I use for my moving averages or how to use them, what is their purpose. So, I'm going to cover all of that in this video. So, starting off, what are moving averages? Basically, they're little lines that follow price and they take the average of whatever set number of bars, and it just averages the price of those 10, 20, 100 bars and sets a price for it, each bar. And as each bar changes, so does the average price, and it moves with the bars. So let's say you set 100 bars as your settings for your moving average. So it'll take the average price of those 100 bars, and it will take the mean. So like if you look at this red line, which is the 100, it takes the average price of these 100, and that's what it is. So as you can see, it's basically in the middle. It's in the middle because that's the average price, if that makes sense. And yeah, that's why it doesn't always like it doesn't not going to mirror price, because if it's taking the average of these, then there's going to be a big discrepancy, clearly, because some have a price of they could have 500 pip variation in price. So that's why it takes a while for price to move down to the mean, I guess you would call it. So that's what a moving average is, very technically. Now, for its purpose, its moving averages are used in two ways, basically. The first way, it is used for trend identification. So a lot of times there'll be like some systems have moving average crossover to determine the trend. So they would say, since price is below the 100 and the 50 moving average, it's in a downtrend, we want to short. And once price breaks through the 50 and the 100, once they cross over and price is above, then it's in an uptrend. So they're sometimes used for trend identification. And how I personally like to use them the most, used for support and resistance, for price to bounce off of these levels, pretty much. So that's how I use them. And depending on the settings you use, they can be very powerful. So the moving averages I use, by the way, I don't use an exponential moving average, also known as an EMA. I just use a basic, I guess what it would be called, a simple moving average. Yeah, they're not too different, but they are somewhat different. Basically, an exponential moving average weights basically the bars that are closest to it more than, so let's say you have 100 period moving average, so 100 bars moving average. It will weight the the last 20 or the last 50 bars more heavily than it will weight the 50 bars before that. So it does move a little bit differently. Now, as for the settings for my moving averages, I have the 200 moving average, that's in the dark blue. I have 100 period moving average, that's in red, 100. And by the way, as you can see, it says close, close, close. It uses the price of the close for the bar, FYI. So lastly, I have the 50 period moving average with the light blue. So these are the ones that big institutions use, big traders, especially the 200 and the 100 are much more heavily used than the 50. That's why I always say that the 200 is the strongest, the 100 is a little less strong, and then the 50 is the least strongest moving average when we're talking about using it for support and resistance. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, I prefer using the 200 and the 100. Very rarely do I take in consideration the 50, but sometimes I do. like using it if it's in a really, as you can see, strong trends. The 50 is helpful in very strong trends, but for most trends, the 100 and the 200 are going to be much more reliable as a support, and of course on the opposite direction, much more reliable as resistance. So however, I do also use them for trend identification. I don't necessarily have a super technical if this crosses over with this or that. I just look at it visually, like very, very, simply. You can just see, okay, here, as you can see, if you look at the moving averages, most of them are below the price. So it's in an uptrend. And if the fundamentals line up with it, then of course I'll be looking to buy. Same thing on the downside. Although recently, as you can see, there hasn't been much of one, but as you can see, price was below all three moving averages. So and of course, if the fundamentals align, I'll be looking to sell somewhere around the 100, somewhere around the 200. And of course, I use other things with Confluence. I don't just trade off of these. I use them as confirmation with, Fibonacci levels, with trend lines, and with key levels / zones, whatever you want to call them. So that's what I use moving averages for. An example here is on the British pound New Zealand dollar. I used it here as confirmation to take a buy, to buy the dip here. I used the 100, which matched up perfectly. Another example recently is the British pound Australian dollar. I actually used it a few times. I used it here. Actually, recently I used it here to take a buy on the 4-hour. I used the 200, and as you can see, the 200 has been respected. I also used it there to take a buy. So very helpful in this case. And if we're looking at the 1-hour chart, I used it to actually add a position here. I went long right here. So I went long right here, and I used this 100 sort of as confirmation to add a position. I get it's not perfect, and it won't always be perfect, but it can be used as confirmation. So that's how I use moving averages. That's, and these ones specifically, these numbers 200, 150 are used by bigger traders, so they will be respected more heavily than, let's say, if you picked a 80 period moving average or a 20 period moving average, or a 500 period moving average. Those ones are used a lot less heavily, so they will be respected a lot less, to put it frankly. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you guys gained something from this. This is how I use moving averages. A lot of people might use them differently. This is just me, personal preference. That's how I use them. So I will see you guys on, I guess, Friday for Fundamental Friday, and then probably over the weekend I will be uploading my stock challenge video with the results. So stay tuned for that. Have a great trading week, and I'll talk to you guys later.